Awesome. Okay. Welcome, everyone. We're really excited to have everyone here for our third Fireside Chat series event. Just a reminder, these are going to be quarterly, different themes every time, and this theme is going to be services. So we went through the poll. I think you guys may still see it possibly, but there's a real mix of knowledge in this room, which is really valuable, and kind of a mix of where people are in their careers and if they're in the housing field or not. So we're happy to have all of you and hope that everyone can learn something today with us. So just some ground rules to reiterate. Please be on mute unless you're asking a question, and Marissa or Dixie will call on you when the question times come. Show your video if you're comfortable to do so it feels like we're together, and then put any questions in the chat box. The simple agenda is we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Wong, and it's going to be pretty informal, and there will be audience questions mixed in throughout. So it should be a good mix of questions from us and from you guys. So here's the formal welcome. My name is Anna Cole, and I'm a member of the Silicon Valley at Home Coalition of Housers Working Group, and we host all the COHO events. And we'll put in a chat a link where you can stay up to date on all these events, and you can subscribe to the email list so that you can go to these future fireside chats and then also other things that we throw throughout the year. The Coalition of Housers, or COHO, is a network of new and emerging leaders working in and advocating for affordable housing in the South Bay. The goal of COHO is to support the leadership and professional development of a diverse community of practitioners in the affordable housing industry and among industry partners. Thank you to Marissa and Dixie on the Careers in Affordable Housing team within COHO, and Kriti for supporting us always and making this event possible. Thank you all for joining. This quarter's guest is Dr. Jorge Wong. As the Director of Housing Services at the Health Trust in San Jose, California, he works with a population of people experiencing chronic homelessness, comorbid mental illness, substance use disorders, HIV/AIDS, and those involved with the criminal justice system. He's an alum, trustee, and adjunct faculty at Palo Alto University, serves in the Training Advisory Committee for the American Psychological Association Minority Fellowship Program for the Mental Health and for the Mental Health and Substance Abuse Fellowship, and a past president of the California Psychological Association, and recently received APA Division 31 2020 Award for Outstanding Psychologist in a state, provincial, or territory psychological association. So very experienced, and we are very lucky to have him here today with us. So just to kick it off, Dr. Wong, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you live, anything about family or where you're from, and 3 words you would use to describe yourself?
Thank you, Anna. And again, thank you very much for inviting me, and glad to see everybody to take their time off from lunch. And I'm hoping to make it worthwhile, because between myself and lunch, I prefer lunch. Where do I come from? I'm of Chinese descent, as you can tell by my last name. It is actually one of the most populous last names in the city of San Francisco, where I actually grew up. But I was actually born in Cuba, so I'm actually have, culturally speaking, some Cuban or Latino kind of values. So in that sense, we immigrated here as political refugees, and I grew up in San Francisco. And one of the things I recall was that upon arrival to San Francisco, we got here at night, but the next day in the morning, we woke up, we went outside. Our family took us out to eat, and the first thing I told my sister, my parents, was like, wow, I've never seen this many Chinese people in my life. Growing up in Chinatown, you see a lot of Chinese folks. Then my Chinese improved, but I was actually quite surprised, because even growing up in Cuba, I didn't quite see myself as Chinese. I was trying to be more Cuban. Cuban didn't quite accept me. They said I was more Chinese. Then I come to America, to the United States, and people saying, well, you're Chinese. I'm not quite, you're not quite Cuban, you're not American. So I always kind of grew up within these kind of intersectionalities, and kind of always been like feeling like an outsider, but also understanding that the flexibility that having different world perspectives allow you to think and problem solve. So in that sense, I was stereotypically like all Chinese kids or Asian kids were forced to go to college and try to become either a computer person, a medical doctor, or some sort of business person. That was a little bit different. I never quite liked studying, so ended up actually playing quite a bit in college, and ultimately I found that psychology was something that came more naturally. Also being like the firstborn, and in many collective families, you are given the duties to take care of your family. So caretaking, understanding, and kind of trying to resolve challenges was something that came more naturally to me. So in that sense, I gravitated towards psychology, which again, I did end up taking an undergraduate in psychology, and then later on learned that, you can't really get much done with a bachelor in psychology. So I was initially considering a master's, but I ended up pursuing a PhD at Palo Alto University. And that's kind of how I ended up in the mental health field. So in the question about 3 words to describe me, I would say I'm atypical. I've been told by many folks, including students when I teach, that when you think about a college professor, you're fun and good, but you're not what we typically think a college professor is. So I will take that. I'm kind of fun in a way. I think sometimes people tell me to stop being so humorous and so immature, but I've always felt that you're here in this world, you might as well just enjoy what you do, and if you're not enjoying it, you shouldn't be there. So no matter how challenging the situation, I always try to find the fun kind of line and ensure that everybody gets uplifted by some humor. And it's also, I've learned in psychology that humor is a very great, sophisticated defense mechanism to address a lot of challenges and sadness in the world. So I use that oftentimes and say, well, how do you know? Well, I'm a psychologist. Of course I know these things. So make it sound a little more intelligent. But it's just I tend to be goofy, tend to be a little bit more immature. And the other one is like energetic. I don't know whether it's just natural energy or the fact that caffeine is actually still legal, and I drink quite a bit of it. So I'm always kind of jumping up and down, and in that sense makes me think quite quickly. So resourceful is also another word that has been used to describe me. So that's what I bring. And I would say sometimes my supervisors and bosses, they tend to like, calm down, guy, calm down, chill, take a chill pill. So bring that kind of an energy to the workplace and also to thinking about problems and problem solving. Likewise, when I work with clients or do supervision, I always bring additional perspectives that people really don't think about. So I'm always happy to bring more information and resources for them to troubleshoot.
Sounds like 3 perfect descriptors for a speaker for this event, so we appreciate it. And then if you could explain your job in everyday terms to someone who may not be as familiar with it, and what your career path was to end up here.
That's a great question, because actually I've been thinking about it for quite a few days now. And I don't know, sometimes people feel that, you believe in fate or something serendipity, or sometimes the stars just align. So as I mentioned, I was immigrated to the US with my family as a political refugee. So really experienced trying to find housing, living in cramped quarters. My family still, lived in the same place for like 42 years, 1-bedroom place, and 4 of us resided there. I used to tell people that I used to sleep underneath a living room table after I had a folding bed, sticking in. And kind of you make use of whatever you have to survive. And that was how it was, because understanding your situation coming to a new country, you need to work hard, not much money, not understanding the culture, there's a lot of limitations. So as I grew up and became a psychologist, I tended to work more with the community population, particularly those who are monolingual, like Cantonese or Taoiseach speaking and Spanish speaking. And a lot of the Latino folks that I work with, they will say, when they made appointments on the phone, they used to say, if your Spanish is pretty good. Then when they saw me, they were perplexed for like a good 10, 15 minutes. And they remember one time working with a family, both parents came in with the kids, and the father just kept staring at me the entire time. He goes, where do you learn Spanish? And I go, Chinatown. And he was still perplexed. And I waited in La Habana, in Cuba. And he said, okay. Your Spanish is pretty good. And I go, you too? He goes, I'm Mexican. Well, I was born Cuban. So that kind of helped. So working with that population, understanding some of the challenges, how they felt about mental health, the stigma that went along with it, also allowed me to work in crisis, youth and adolescent crisis, responding to some of their needs. And oftentimes took me to places where there were cramped quarters, places where people really didn't have much space to really emote or really work out some of the tensions that were building up within the family. So I went to many places that I would say now are some of the clients that we actually work with. Over time, I work with in corrections, in jails and prisons, and then later on came back and worked in inpatient and also ongoing substance abuse folks. So as I worked through that, I ended up, moving up in the organizational chain to become a program manager, director, and also lead an agency a few years ago. And then as things were kind of calming down with some family issues, I stepped out and I was invited graciously by someone that I have the pleasure of at least working with before, and in some way kind of helping to move along in their educational career. Say, hey, would you be interested in doing housing? And for myself, as a psychologist working with mental health, I'm thinking, housing, I have no experience in housing. So the explanation was that we do have individuals who are chronically homeless, they get housed and then sometimes have challenges remaining housed. So bringing a behavioral health or mental health component can really address some of that transition that this model, housing first, actually brings. And since I've been here, I've learned that housing first is a great model, but it's also missing other components like the ongoing behavioral health support to ensure that people can continue to live in the new facilities or the new premises with other folks, and also be able to kind of reintegrate into how things are done in a kind of living situation. So the behavioral health or the mental health component has been a great asset to bring in. So we've been talking about housing first plus. It's like bringing the whole behavioral health, mental health support to not only work with an individual, but also those around them. Because if you think about someone who has been chronically homeless for many years, depending on many peers and doing things outside of what we consider the normal, laws and regulations and expectations because they need to survive, having them change and really do things very differently without their resources in a whole new place where they have to relearn how the system works, it's pretty scary. It's pretty scary. It's pretty frustrating. And sometimes people may not have good frustration tolerance. Sometimes they may be using substances to survive on the outside, which then also impacts their mental health conditions and just get really convoluted. And also bringing additional support, peer support, sometimes they may be used for the facility, sometimes they do depend on others, and they haven't really trusted the system quite a bit. So it's almost like someone coming to a new country from somewhere that they don't have these type of services available, and you need to then not only enculturate them or have them slowly integrate into the system, understand what they need to do, pros and cons. If you're to do things the same ways that you were doing before, these may not be the positive outcomes. What are some of the challenges that are really impeding you from doing some of the goals that have been set up in your service plans? So I think not only engaging the clients, but also staffing is also a critical piece, because if our staff is not equipped, understanding some of those challenges, oftentimes they blame the individual themselves for being resistant, refusing, non-cooperative. But if we really help the staff understand that, hey, there's lots of trauma issues that are impacting these individuals. If these are some of the signs and symptoms that you see, could it be really as a result of substances, or is it the personality? How can you go about engaging them? What can you actually do to entice them, or at least convince them, or invite them to consider behavioral health services, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's mental health? Most people are also open to getting physical health, but oftentimes it is the mind that really stops you, or becomes a barrier for anybody to achieve healthy living goals. So I think understanding more how mental health or how psychology can help not only the staff, but also how to deal with the clients themselves, the landlords, the property managers, some of their peers, and how even for them to say no to some of the individuals who keep kind of coming into the world and really sabotaging to some degree some of the required goals that they need to achieve to maintain permanent housing. So I think that's a good way to say that, looking back, all the path that I've taken seems to have actually led to come to a place where mental health or behavioral health is truly needed to really help maintain someone safely, productively, and even have them over time be motivated to kind of move and achieve other goals and become self-sufficient. So that's kind of how I came about doing this. I've been in the Bay Area, in the South Bay Area, since graduate school back in the 90s, but I've also been involved here in the Valley with things for close to 30, 40 years now in the field. So, but I'm glad I'm here. It's a brand new world. It's exciting. And there's a lot of opportunity to really integrate housing as well as the mental health kind of support into it. So hopefully we can develop the next chapter of Housing First with the Housing First plus other ongoing services.
Yeah, I love how you emphasize Housing First Plus, because it's a phrase that I'm less familiar with, but it is so essential in the housing world. Marissa, do we have any audience questions yet, or should we keep going?
We don't have any questions yet, so if there are any questions come, feel free to put them in the chat and I will ask you to unmute. In case there's any questions now, this is your time.
Okay, well, we'll keep going, and if you have any questions, we'll have another spot to ask them as well. So then another question we have for you, Dr. Wong, is if you could just mention some things that you love about your job and maybe some things that you're continuing to learn in your current position, in the theme of lifelong, career-long learning.
Learning, there's definitely no limits to that, and I always keep learning. I've been here for a little bit over a year, and I'm still like, oh, I didn't know that. So different things keep coming up, and as we know, it takes about a year or so for us to kind of get comfortable with a new position, and then you start finding out that the next deeper level of things and how intricate things can become. What I do love is like as I brought the whole kind of clinical foundation to assist in not only our coordinated care program, working with individuals with these complex issues, but also trying to share that across other housing services, whether it's like the subsidy components of housing, how to help people deal with individuals who may not necessarily follow through with things, having them also understand that sometimes, trauma does impact individuals, not only in a very immediate way, but it also permeates throughout everything that they do. Sometimes you've heard of adverse childhood experiences. You also heard of transgenerational transmission of trauma, substance abuse, head injuries or closed head injuries oftentimes really cause individuals to really not do things the way that we would like them to do. In particular, they may be able to do some, but there's like variations, or there's some things that they are missing that really frustrates the case managers, because they were doing so well and all of a sudden they dropped it off. So what happened? How do they understand that that can also be impacted by either mental health issues, substance abuse, or even chronic long time use of substances can really impact the brain and deteriorate the way that the brain functions, to the point where they can't really think in what we call executive functioning, planning ahead, understanding time, sequencing things, so even keeping track of things. So that allows for the staff to be more compassionate and much more understanding as to some of the challenges that they bring. The other thing I also like is bringing the whole clinical support and supervision, where oftentimes our staff feel berated by the clients, especially if they're having a bad day or something goes wrong, they get blamed, and they always feel like, we worked so hard to get you to this point, you're doing so great, and something else happened, we have no control over it, and now you guys are yelling, screaming, throwing things at us because we're the culprit, we're the first person who's there. But I think it's a great privilege for them to allow the client to trust them to be able to share that kind of level of intense emotions and frustration, because they have this relationship where they can actually talk more. So I've always I've worked with the team or with the staff to really say, embrace that as an opportunity. They're opening out the window and the client's really showing you the points of vulnerability at this point. It's a great opportunity for you to jump in and help them to really use that energy and focus it in a way that is actually much more beneficial for them. How do you do that? It's about timing. It's about really using the right terminology. And sometimes it's not just about talking, but it's also about how your body is communicating, as I call it, meta messages. It's like the message that you're sending that is nonverbal, but it's between the messages. So I've seen how many of the staff are really become intrigued with this idea that, oh, mental health or psychological strategies can also be very helpful in engaging the clients to get onto their service goals and move ahead. Understanding too, like, as all human beings, we may take one step forward, 3 steps back. I always remind folks, everybody keeps talking about motivation, interviewing, and all these things, and they keep asking, you remember that one day that you thought you wanted to do something? For example, some of you guys are talking about going to graduate school. How long did it take you from the time that you thought about it to you actually getting into grad school? And then, oh, it took me a few years and blah, blah, blah. And that's assuming that you don't have all the challenges that some of our clients are going through. So once they realize that, oh my God, it also takes me, who I think I'm pretty competent, that much time to get something going, we can't really just blame the client and say, hey, how come you can't get it done in a whole month or so? Because if it took us a few years to think about it, think about the application, writing our statements, putting in, setting the fees and waiting to get accepted, I think it really gives them a comparison in a world that they actually understand that these clients are also struggling. So helping them to increase the pool of empathy and also understanding, but yet also reminding that they are the one person or team that could bring a glimpse of hope to the client's world. So that I keep learning and many ways of doing it, whether the client is also experiencing challenges because of the HIV/AIDS situation or the probation, they violate some things. Some of them like PC 190, which are the sexual offenders. So, well, I can't live here, but I want to live there. But, given your status, you need to think about alternatives. And I think giving them options and having them realize the ability to make choices in any one fork in the road, they have a choice to make with understanding like, if you make this choice, these are the consequences. Have you thought about this? What are some of the alternative plans that you can make so that you can continue moving in that direction? Or some people say, I want to get this job, but they haven't worked in a long time. So how do you build a resume slowly, convincing them that small steps are not just baby steps like babies take, but it's also allowing them to start going in a new path that they haven't gone for a long time. And in very much a comparison to other people who's emotionally stunted at a certain point because of trauma, it's like, you physically, you are, 40, 50 years old, but in this particular area, which you haven't done for a long time, you're back, early 20s or even like the teenage years. And I think if the client's in the right space to hear that and their staff is in the right space to share that with them and engage them and help them understand it, is that I've seen some glimpses of great hope for particular cases that I'm keeping my fingers crossed. So in that sense, I think the learning and using the clinical skills is really exciting to see when it's even helping particular cases move along. And in my fantasy world, if we can actually get the entire team or the entire housing department to start thinking like that or have those tools in their tool belts when they go out there, just think how amazingly they can help these individuals, not only to move, but hopefully, become self-independent, kind of get off our caseload so we can actually get new cases coming in. So, but don't get me wrong, it is a lot of work. It is a lot of it's definitely not a 9-to-5 thing, because it's just like taking time to almost educate or bring in a whole graduate training program into a place where they never thought that was possible. So that's what keeps you exciting. That's what I'm learning every day.
I love what you said about connecting it to things in your own life, that how long did it take you to get from here to here, and using that as a tool for empathy. That's really valuable. Marissa, do we have any more questions? I think I saw a few.
Yes, let me unmute myself first. We had a few questions. The first one is from Kat. Kat said, Dr. Wong, I'd love to hear more about the peer services model and integrating support services. Where do you see this model going, and what would help with this model grow?
We currently don't have peer support services, but I think I've heard about it, and I think it's a great way to really bring individuals who have lived experiences, because sometimes clients may see folks coming in and say, you're getting paid, this is your job. What do you really know about this? And unless the client really shares where they've been or what path they walked, the client may not necessarily feel that the immediate trust or connection, and sometimes it might take longer. Now, of course, coming from a clinical side, like when do you disclose? Should you disclose initially? Is it too much? What is appropriate? What is not? And I think that's also another way that to train staff to really use their experience and also engage with the client to the point where it can elicit that trust and understand that I too understand where you've been, and determining when is the right time to share and also how much to share. Sometimes we want to share, well, I was like that before and I did this and I did that and look where I'm at right now, I'm helping others. Oftentimes gives the message to the client that say, hey, I did it, why can't you do it? You must be a failure. So inherently there's that potential risk that the message can carry, but helping our staff to understand when to use it, how to engage it, and also understand for the professionals that individuals who have lived experience have a certain instant credibility or street cred, as I keep calling it, with individuals, that they can help them engage to come in. And as a team together, no one's really taking anybody's job, but it's just kind of supplementing or kind of strengthening the model or the services that we can give as a team to help somebody. So now you have one client with a peer and also a professional helping them to stay permanently housed and move along their plans. Makes much more sense, because just because we get assigned a caseload, or it does not mean that we always have to get along or the clients need to like us. Sometimes it is something inherent about how we look or what we remind our clients that make them not like us as much. But if we actually were to have peers, they can actually engage with them in a way that we can't because of their life path and also the clients that we're working with. I see that as a strength, as an additional strength that can bring to the team to really help the client move along. So peers are great. Peers have been used in the mental health field, and for many, many years in the substance abuse recovery side, having a sponsor through the AA process has been very useful for people to really call in the middle of the night, talk with folks, and have them really understand, because they themselves have walked the same path. So there's really a room for peers, professionals, and also other more clinical people to work in this particular field, I feel.
I think we have a few more questions. Is that right?
Yeah, we do have another question. Maddie, I know you had a question. Yours came up next about the housing first. Would you like to unmute?
Yeah, I think I heard you mention Housing First Health. Is this a concept or an organization? I'm just hearing about it for the first time.
No, that's something that we've made up ourselves here. So Housing First is definitely a model that has been used, which basically just try to get someone housed as quickly as possible, with the understanding that housing can really alleviate some of the others. It's like in mental health, we call psychosocial stressors, or I guess most recently, social determinants of health, other things that could impact individuals. So if you feel safely housed, have a roof over your head, is warm, then you can move on to other things. What I've also come to realize, like housing is a good steps, but you also need something else. So that's the plus. That could include bringing additional clinical support, behavioral health understanding, or staff that are understanding or equipped to address those issues, so that they can engage, help, understand that sometimes the negative interactions with the client is really not addressed at them as a person, but it's also how they can be the receptacle, the source of what do you call that? We can help contain the client's kind of anger to really help them, based on the relationship that we've built, to really work on what they need to do moving forward. So I've been using Housing First Plus as an additional plus services, because oftentimes that seems to be what is missing. I hear a lot about, someone is going to get kicked out because something like this, or they're going to lose housing, so quickly finding another place to live. But the caveat is that you can find them another place to live, as Santa Clara County tries to build more housing, but yet the person has not addressed the real reason why they were busting out from the initial placement, whether they may be not getting along with the neighbors because the neighbors say, oh, you did this, or some property manager say, oh, there's another violation, to the lease because, you stayed out, or you brought your bicycle, you put something in front of your room, your door is blocking, or if you live in a apartment building, you put something in the hallway, it's a fire hazard, that's a lease violation. So people don't understand those things. So if that is the case, why is it that they don't understand it, or they're not educated initially, or is that something that they want to do because they feel more safe having more stuff? As we know, many of the homeless or people experiencing homelessness tend to hoard quite a lot of stuff. And if we think about it, we do the same thing. It's called shop therapy, right? So retail therapy is that we don't buy things that make us comfortable, and then it gets to the point that we got so much we donate. But the things like for someone living on the street, they donated it, then they don't have that anymore. So they need to look for additional things. And over time, it's more of a survival kind of thing. I have things just to make sure that I have enough for when I might need it. And in those situations, they might need it more frequently than we do. So if our staff is not equipped with additional skills to really address that, and they're just really good at just housing them, I think they're missing a huge component, which is the more kind of softer skills that our staff needs to have, and that also needs a lot of time to train. So I've referred to it as a housing first plus as an additional service that goes along with it. So hopefully that's clear.
And then I think there was one more question, or we might have time for two more because we have about 10 minutes left. But before we go into the next questions, in case anyone is heading out early, we do have a survey. If you could fill that out before you leave so we get some feedback for future events. Let me see who is next.
We have a question from Kathy next. I will ask to unmute if it works.
I've got a couple of tough questions for our presenter. The first one is, how do you think racialized life experiences interact with other kinds of trauma and then impact the client's housing issues?
That is a hard question. Yeah, I think there's a disproportionate numbers of particular individuals who are experiencing homelessness, and also sometimes it quite doesn't match the available case managers or the professionals working. I think it's a reality that we really need to face, and I think that's also another part of training our staff to getting them equipped to really address some of the more challenging questions, because someone might look at you and say, well, you've never been homeless, number one, or you're not this particular skin color, you don't understand what I'm going through. But I think being able to relate and also understand and possibly share some similar experience, they may not be exactly the same or to the same degree, but how close can we actually have our staff come to sharing with them that yes, we have an understanding of something similar or parallel to some of that. It may be that your particular group has been persecuted or institutionalized, discriminated for much longer in this particular area, but also the group that I belong to also has these type of discrimination and injustices done upon us. As long as that our staff doesn't really take it personally and kind of gets defensive, they can always come back and process that with the supervisors and kind of get them ready for the next meeting. But I think it is a reality, and we cannot really deny the fact that we don't have enough equal, I guess you can call it either racial matches to the population that we're serving. But one thing that I've also learned through psychological research is that there's always been talked about matching in regards to race and culture and also language to the clients, because that is most effective. And it has been shown that in some cases it is, in other cases it is not. In other cases it's also about, if you have someone that is the same ethnic group, same language speaking, it could also increase the number of sessions that they have together, but not necessarily the therapeutic outcome. It doesn't have to be the same, or it doesn't have to be more successful than somebody who is totally mismatched. Sometimes the matching or what it really clicks amongst the client and the service providers could be stuff like socioeconomic background, education, and having a common event or common experience that they've had that could bring them together. So it doesn't quite work as a peanut butter all across, but I think our staff also needs to understand where they're at, the privileged space, what do they bring, what they need to learn, but also share with the client, like, I may not necessarily understand some of the racial issues or injustices you've experienced, but I do know one thing, I do know how to get you housed. So if you want, we can work on getting you housed, and you can educate me, and we can learn both together. And if I don't know what you're looking for, I will work my butt off to get you those resources and connect you. So here is somebody who may not really be matched equally, but is willing to help. The one thing that differentiates us is that we're really good at finding you housing, and we can support you in other stuff too. So it doesn't become more like, I know everything, but I am a conduit to what you, the client, wants to do. But first, it's like, how can we get over that barrier of testing each other out, sizing each other up to make sure that, can we work together? You may not like me, and I may not like you, but judge me over time. And that's even what I tell staff here. It's like, you might think I'm kind of goofy and weird and stuff, but judge me over time. Am I consistent? Are things getting moved to improve? If not, give me feedback and we'll work it together. So eliciting their cooperation and participation is also very important. So there are many other strategies to really reduce some of those barriers put up front, because sometimes we do have stereotypes, we do have protective factors that triggered us from our past life experiences. But I would say that not everybody's the same, and I think if we are open and patient and tolerant enough, and we can train our staff to be that, we can at least elicit some level of cooperation from my clients to work on those issues. And if it's true that, hey, maybe I'm of a potential racial group that is seen as favored or not discriminated as much, let's talk about that. But meanwhile, can you fill out this form so we can go on our way to go look at the new housing to see whether you like it or not? So we can, do multiple things at the same time as we get to know each other. And one of the things that our staff always likes to do is like buy food, just engage in a warm meal with the client, and that really goes a long way. So breaking bread traditionally has always been a way to bring opposing groups or opposing individuals together to the table. So roundabout, not direct answer, because I can go off for hours giving you different examples, but I think that's kind of roundabout way to answer it. So.
I had a second question. Do we have time, or should we see that?
There is one more question from the audience, and I'm wondering if we can maybe put those two together, because your question is great. If you wanted to go ahead, go first, and then I'll read the question.
Just real quickly, Jorge, how do you think that the pandemic has impacts the Housing First Plus? Has that changed as we transition back to normal? What does that look like?
I don't think there's a normal ever going back. It's going to be a new normal that we need to set, which includes part of the pandemic lessons learned. It has impacted the staff because I think it has kind of limited them in regards to having as much face-to-face contact. But because our clientele, the folks that we work with, do want to have contact, sometimes they lose their phones and they don't have good internet connectivity. Face-to-face contact is still necessary. So our staff are still going out there, and sometimes have to even drive up places like El Camino up and down just to look for the clients or ask acquaintances that they've seen where the client is. So we do have that. Whether it is a great way to really engage because you're talking now in a public space and there's not much confidentiality, that is something that needs to be worked out. But I think that was not anything different from how things could have been done or were done before, because if you actually meet somebody at their place of residence, sometimes they may have other visitors or family members or friends, as they call them, there too. And there's not much space to do that. So really adjusting it to how to use technology and also ensuring that clients can retain a consistent way to communicate, even though they're not here physically, this also has been a challenge. So I think adjustment to that has been a good learning lesson. As a matter of fact, one of our staff was able to talk with this individual who kept losing their phone all the time and losing their business cards and all that. Ultimately, she had a dog, so they went to where the pet store is, and got a dog tag to actually put in the staff phone number, so at least it's with the dog. So this way they would not lose their phone numbers. So I think adjusting and being creative is always a good thing too, to engage. So, but I don't think we're going to ever go back to the same as a year ago. So.
And I think we have one last question for 3 minutes. So
go ahead.
Or you go ahead, Marissa. I'm not sure who it is.
There's one last question from Lewis. For those of us who work as owners of supportive housing, do you think you could tell us maybe 2 or 3 top things you wish owners knew before they open projects with permanent supportive housing, PSH?
That's a great question. I think if you open up to supportive housing services, it's great to have the service providers come educate you as to the clients. Of course, getting the releases of information so you can understand what you can hear about. What can the staff do to support you when something happens on the property? Also, how to work with them. I would even be open to saying, hey, if you need some training for the property management staff, we're open to going and doing that. So I think that could be part of the Housing Plus kind of services that we can support, because it's not just supporting the individual themselves, but also the landlord, property managers, so that they can understand. And if anything else, even a great opportunity to do an entire kind of facility education about what it means to live in a community with very diverse populations, some having some challenges that you may not have, but also how to be much more tolerant, where to seek for services and in community resources that will also be helpful not only to the residents, but also to the property managers and the owners. Because I think the more informed, the more educated, and better trained the people supporting our clientele, I think the greater success collectively that we will have. So at least for the teams or the properties that the health trust is providing services to, it's a great opportunity for me to remind them, if any of the property managers or owners want to learn more as to what they can actually do, this could be another supportive service that we can provide for them. So, great suggestion. More work for me to do, but a great suggestion.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think we're right at time. We really appreciate your time and joining us and being able to learn from you during our lunch, 45 minutes, I guess. Please, everyone, stay connected and look out for future events. Our next Fireside Chat is going to be during Affordable Housing week. I can't remember which it is. So May 14th with Jackie Morales Ferrand. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And there's a post-event survey in the chat if you could also do that. And Dr. Wong, do you mind if we send out your contact info if anyone has any questions?
No, please do so and ask away. We're here to help. So
Awesome.
Thank you again for taking your time, and I'm very honored to be here.
We're really happy you could join us. Thank you, everyone.
Stay safe.
Thank you all. Thank you so much, Dr. Wong.
Thank you.